All right, I'll be ready. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I want to especially welcome panelists and our audience, both in the room and online, to this very panel. Today, the panel is titled Transformation in African Extractive Industries, Colonial Legacies, Current Challenges, and Future Directions. This panel has 5 presenters. So far, we have 2 panelists online and 2 panelists right here in the room. Okay, we have 3 now. We have here. So thank you very much for all making yourself available for the conversation we have today. We are right on time, and we hope we won't be having much of technical glitches. We'll be able to use full 1 hour 30 minutes. So just to proceed, we'll probably give about 10-12 minutes for each presentation. So we can see we can use 50 minutes to 1 hour for presentation, and then have the room 30 minutes for the Q&A section. But just before we go into the business of the day, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I would like to start with Idowu Ajibade Samuel, who will be talking to us today about the political economy of the Nigerian marble industry, 1969 to 1986. Idowu Ajibade Samuel is a PhD candidate. So can you hear me?
Yeah, they can hear you.
Yeah. Honorable, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. I want to be sure. Idowu is a PhD candidate at the Ibadan School of History, University of Ibadan. His interests include African history, economic history, business history, and mining history. He has written and published papers in this field of study, and his PhD research is based on the history of Ibeti marble industry, 1969 to 2010. Next on our list is Naluwebe Binaisa. I hope I pronounced that name well. I'm so sorry if I did. Please forgive me. So we're talking to us today on the topic titled Discourses of Protection, Injury, and Agency in the Niger Delta, Nigeria. Binaisa is an interdisciplinary scholar and creative practitioner whose work seeks to understand mobilities of belonging, identity, and citizenship across gender and generation dynamics within Africa and her diaspora. She is currently based at Quebec University of London, and she is working on Colonial Reef projects. Going forward, we have Kelechi Njoku Igwe, who is affiliated to the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Kelechi will be talking to us today on a title African Resource Governance and the Challenges. Kelechi is a research fellow at the NIA Division of Security and Strategic Studies in the Research Department. The NIA is Nigerian foremost think tank on foreign policy. Also, the NIA, where he serves, is in the General Leo Irabo Early Warning System Center as a threat and crisis analyst, reporting and analyzing threats to national security and providing a reliable assessment of situation for the Nigerian government and as appropriate and timely policy responses. Kelechi's research is centered on geopolitics, defense, and foreign policy of African states. Next on our list is Bernard Bofi and Kwenet Omoyipo. Their topic is Energy Governance and Development in West Africa, a political economic analysis approach. Bernard Bofi is a prospective PhD student and a fellow of the British Academic Funded Writing and Researching the Political Economy of Inequality in Africa program, which is led by Professor Sophia Price at the Leeds Beckett University and Professor Alex Noor at Leeds Trinity University, UK. Currently, Bernard is at the thesis examination stage of a fully funded MSc Energy Policy, Regulation and Management Program at the World Bank Africa Center of Excellence in Sustainable Power and Energy Development, hosted at the University of Nigeria for Suka. Bernard holds an MA in Public Affairs from the Political Science Department of the University of Ghana and a BA in Management Studies from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. Bernard has rich experience in the energy and development sector, 7 years of which directly involved working in the sustainability function of Ghana's Jubilee and 10 oil and gas exploration and production projects. He is also an associate fellow of the Royal Commonwealth Society UK since 2015. And last but not least on our list there is Colonial A. Opara, who is affiliated to the University of Nigeria, Suka. His paper today is titled The British Colonial Industrial Policy in the Eastern Region of Nigeria, 1939 to 1960. Oloniwu Opara is a PhD student in the Department of History and International Studies at the University of Nigeria, Suka. His areas of specialization include African history, slavery and the Atlantic World, empire and decolonization, and urban race and memory studies. Thank you everyone for making yourself present today so that we can have a very interactive and productive conversation here today. So without taking much more time, like I said, I'll give 10, 12 minutes to each panelist to speak to us about their research, their paper. And after that, we will hopefully take questions at the end of the entire presentation. So I would like to call on Idowu Akibade Samuel to take the floor and make his presentation to us.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. As you have rightly been told, my name is Oluwan Akibade, and I'm
How do you tell us? Yeah. So the camera can capture it. Okay.
You are we are the guests. Your party.
Oh, thank you.
My title of my paper is the political economy of the Nigerian movement from 1969 to 1986. I introduced my work by saying that the study examining the marble mining potentials in Nigeria by analyzing the social and economic impact of marble extraction in the Legacies, Oyo State, a predominantly rural and agrarian community. And I'm studying this marble industry through an analytical framework of municipal economy. This is also located within the discursive and parameters of exploitation, legislation, political interference, environmental issues, capital accumulation, economic development, conflict, and dispossession. Now, the Nigerian marble industry was coined from some of the activities that occurred in Ibeti, Oyo State. Ibeti is rich in marble, and you cannot discuss the Nigerian marble industry without referring to the Ibeti marble industry. The activities in that area led to the establishment of the NMMC, the Nigerian Marble Mining Company, in 1986. Nigeria is a country that is well blessed with more than 34 different solid minerals, because I'm trying to examine the mineral industry in Nigeria and how it has affected our economic development. And I am bringing out marble as my case study and fixing it into the best marble industry. And like I said, we have so many areas and in Nigeria that has deposits of marble. Ibeti is one of those areas, and Ibeti and Jakura have been researched and have discovered to be the places that have the highest deposits of marble. We have other areas, we have other areas in the area where you have places where you can get the marble, and their their estimated reserve in millions, and remark whether they are being mined, whether they are in commercial quantities or not. Then I also have another map showing marble mining sites in Nigeria, according to Nigerian Geological Survey of 2023. Then this research adopts a methodology of historical, analytical, and qualitative approach, drawing on archival oral interviews and policy documents. And we have also archival field work with there. The translated method was used to ensure validity, reliability, and in-depth and depth across the sources I'm using. So this study is created between 1969 and 1986, the period that encapsulates the discovery of marble, establishment of marble mines, right, and government intervention, which ultimately led to the collapse of that industry. And then my literature review, I've been able to examine several literature review. Among this literature review, I've been able to bring out Godfrey Fell's mining industry in Nigeria. It talks about tin mining in Nigeria, and also Panola and ons is not enough. It talks about gold mining in Nigeria. Quite important that of Panola's work, which talks about gold mining in colonial Nigeria and Indonesia. He was able to conclude that colonialism deliberately truncated the growth of solid minerals in Nigeria because it would affect their agrarian economy during colonialism. And of course, we should also note that during colonialism, solid mineral development was not well developed, but we had some mineral development, solid minerals such as coal, tin, columbite. At one point, Nigeria was the highest producer of columbite. All these were exported to the UK for their own use, and it was also majorly, some of them were also majorly used in Nigeria's railway system. Then I'm also talking about the concept of resource pulse. I have used it to deploy, I use it and it's deployed to explain the paradox of wealth and underdevelopment in resource-rich communities. Then we have Richard Otti and also Akiwali. And the theory suggests that resource-rich countries are often underdeveloped as a result of corruption and conflict. And the Betty marble industry exemplify this during the course of our study. The Betty is a town located in northern Yoruba territory, also known as the Oke-Ogun. The catchphrase for that town is known as Marble City because of the availability of abundant marble that is seen all over the place. You can pick it on the ground and it's not very far deep in the ground. At the beginning, in 1969, the people did not even discover that what they were using to kill birds and animals or stoning things were actually marbles until somebody actually from Lagos. He belonged to the, he was the owner of the Renaissance marble industry. He was an architect, architectural design and whatever. So he came on board and he was looking for marble. He was able to get marble in the Betty, and he said he was going to come back after sampling, take it to samples and went to test it in his lab. He came back and he started working with it. But before then, he had already met some of his Betty community members, notably the Seriki family. The Seriki family had taken claim to the ownership of the land upon which the marble was or is located. And archival sources reveal that the land was actually given to them after a crisis that ensued between family and a particular, between the family and the Onibetsi at that time. The Alaafin was the head of the, it was an extension of Oyo Kingdom. So Alaafin appointed somebody as the regent there, and they happened to be the Onibetsi, and there was a fight over who capital tax and all that. So after settling the fight, they were asked to go to another place. The Seriki family went to another place, and that was where the land was. So they left them to that land. That land belonged to them, and they had the right to allow who was going to mine, sanction anybody that was mining in that. So they actually gave it to Kasale. But the Ibeti community who served by the Liberty, currently the Liberty at that time, 1969, said, no, this land belongs to the entire Liberty community. You cannot sectionalize it and say this belongs to you and go ahead and enter into an agreement with somebody. So let that person come and have an agreement with us. And that actually led to the beginning of fracas in that place. Then we now had an indigenous takeover later because the second faction that belongs to the university now went ahead to shop for an indigenous entrepreneur that was ready to invest in the Betty marble and somebody that will not just mine in the Betty and take the Betty materials, the marble raw. You are going to bring a kind of backward and forward linkage in our community by diversifying our economy, and he agreed to that. So, and that's the Emmanuel Ashamu, I don't know if you know him, he was also he owned several estates in Lagos. And Chief Emmanuel Ashamu took over simultaneously. Castellane Company and Ashamu began to mine Ibeti marble. And by 1972, there was a decree, indigenization decree, and perhaps that was what led the exit of the Italian map. So in 1970, Ibeti marble was taken over fully by Ashamu, and it was granted the rights by the Western State to quarry marble, and exclusive right to quarry marble. And during this time, there was Ibeti witness unprecedented economic development because we now began to have people migrating. Ibeti used to be an obscure town. But as a result of the coming of Ashamu's Ibeti marble industry, because he established a company which he named Ibeti marble industry, Ibeti was thrown open to diverse people. People began to migrate from Lagos, from Ibadan, from all over Nigeria, because at a point in time, the marble was being supplied to companies like Harper, companies like even Julius Berger, and some government contractors bought marble for special cement and other things they used it. So at a point in time, the company began to decline because the Seriki family did not rest on their oars. They came back and went to meet Chief Bola Ige. Chief Bola Ige now became the governor of old Oyo State. Chief Bola Ige at inception was the was the lawyer of the Betty community, yes. And at a point in time, he now shifted, and tilted his support towards the Seriki family because he wanted to settle the political score, not minding the fact that, not forgetting the fact that what's his name? Oh, thank you very much. What I did was in UPN, Ashamu was in NPN. So there was a problem. The federal government had to intervene. The federal government at that time was Shagari. Shagari was also an NPN. So at the end of the day, the mine was closed down in 1980. And after 4 years of closure, it was reopened again. And it took a name because we now had a joint venture arrangements in which all stakeholders would have benefits. They would they have shareholding percentage. For instance, the Oyo State government had 30%, federal government had 20%. Ashamu's mining industry, because he was the owner of all the machineries they were using, he had 25%. We had the local government, that is the host community, they had 10%, and technical partners, which Ashamu brought in from all over the world, he had 15%. So the company declined, and later on in the Fourth Republic, Alliance for Democracy came on board, and the Alliance for Democracy also took line of Chief Bola Ige. In fact, they revoked so many rights that Ashamu had as the owner of IMR. In result of this, we now had another company that came on board, that's smaller industry. The smaller industry was owned by Chief Jola Pamo, Moraki, it was, it's a ship magnet. So he didn't have time, for this mining stuff. At the end of the day, the Betsy Mabu went the doldrums. My conclusion, this research underscores the need for a more inclusive and accountable governance structure for Nigeria's solid mineral sector. The Betsy Mabu experience highlights the fragility of rural extractive economies in the absence of sustainable policy framework. The Betsy Mabu potential was undermined by political interference, lack of legal clarity, corruption and mismanagement, disunity in community leadership, and despite the multiple revival attempts by the Oyo State government, that place has remained moribund till date. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you so very much for that wonderful presentation and for bringing this conversation to the I think I like the idea of highlighting the issue of migration and also political interference and the absence of regulatory infrastructure, which we all agree is one of the major issues of extractivism in Africa is really, experiencing across the whole continent today. So without taking much of our time, I would like to go to our next speaker who will talk to us. Lalowebe, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can I share my screen, please?
So please grant access.
Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Not
Can you
yet.
see the presentation?
Yeah, it's
Can you-
about to come up.
Okay, yeah, we can see it well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, can start. Please try to keep it within 10, 12 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. You can see my title has slightly changed. It's now reading Discourses of Protection, Injury, and Justice in the Niger Delta. But really, I want to say that the primary focus of my paper remains the same, as it seeks to explore and trace some of the continuities and discontinuities we find when we think about the colonial legacies of the extractive industries in Nigeria. And for my research, there's been a specific focus on the Niger Delta. This project comes from an ongoing project at King's College London called Mapping Injury, which is looking at 4 countries, Nigeria, South Africa, Colombia, and Lebanon, at different sectors of injury, different forms of injury. But with the Niger Delta, the focus has been obviously on the extractive industries. And really, my recent fieldwork has been very much in the archives. And I've sought to think about the long-standing struggle for protection and redress by communities in the Niger Delta against injury wrought by the juggernaut of the resource extraction industries that can be traced from slavery to palm oil to petroleum. My paper draws primarily on visual and textual materials from the colonial era, which have been drawn from a range of institutional archives, particularly the British National Archives in Kew here in London, but also university archives here and also in the US, and commercial archives held by multinational companies such as Shell and Unilever, which continue to operate in Nigeria and globally. So this image that you see on the slide is a photograph taken in the Niger Delta on a palm oil plantation. The photograph was taken in 1959 by Elliot Elisophon, who's a very famous, important photographer, and his archives, he's late now, his archives are actually named after him. They're called the Elliot Elisophon Archives, and they're held at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. But for all of us, we're quite fortunate that quite a lot of his collection has been digitized, and it's an important collection and it's free to access. If you can get online, it's worth looking at because there's quite a lot of material on Nigeria, and you can either Google the name Elliot Elisophon or Google the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archives. So really what I like about this image is I think it illustrates not only the backbreaking labor behind extractive industries, which is often hidden when we just look at economic and environmental impacts, especially when they're set out in a legal case. And it also shows us a landscape which has been caught at a particular moment in time, which might not appear the same at this moment of increasing environmental crisis. One of the avenues I'm exploring in this paper is how discourses work on multiple registers. Here is an image made of a map of Nigeria, again, made in 1959. So this is the last year, the year just before independence, and it featured in Time magazine in their education, as an education program teaching aid, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. And I think what makes this map an important site of critical engagement is because it bridges the education arena with the social media space and the politics of independence, which kept the interests of empire firmly in the driving seat. So the prevailing discourse in the public arena were that the wealth of the newly independent nations, particularly in Africa, were dependent on the existing economic model. So here we see Nigeria depicted primarily as a resource extraction base for a range of cash crops. And you can see how they subdivided Nigeria at that time as 3 geopolitical zones, which is the formula that Britain, the outgoing colonial master, favored. And on the engravings, you see the leaders, the political leaders of the 3 zones, as well as accompanying the raw materials which are to be found or which are being extracted from each zone for global markets. So I want to propose through this presentation that colonial archives help us to untangle the ways in which extractivism and ideas about extractivism intersect across the social, political, and economic space. I want to show how the Colonial Archive exposes the long history of these instruments that have helped operationalize and normalize the most harmful aspects of extractivism across the private and public sphere. Finally, I will make a small aside to the 2021 Petroleum Act, which I think really helps us to consider the ways in which pathways to justice remain blocked when fundamental injustices that date back to the colonial era are left unaddressed. So here you see the front cover of the Opobo Treaty, which was signed in 1884. This is from the National Archives in Kew. And really, treaties, I'm proposing that treaties and maps were the key instruments of what I am terming infrastructures of dispossession. So colonial treaties were termed as treaties of protection. They legitimized the juridical authority of empire, and almost 400 plus treaties were signed between Britain and various kings, queens, and chiefs in the Niger Delta region. But these were really done with this template document, and which speaks to the level of respect or understanding of the different differences between and needs of the different nations. But this was really a race between the European powers, as some of you know from your history. And I want to just highlight that Article 1 of the treaty said it would grant protection to the said nation, king or queen. And then when we turn to page 3 and 4, really I want to talk about Article 3 and Article 4, which consolidated Britain's juridical authority to assign, to legislate, and adjudicate over territory and commerce. Whereas Article 5 burdened the African signatories to assist the colonizers in their every request. And also what is interesting is Article 7 made a racial distinction and specified that rights granted to Christian ministers were only applicable to those who were white. So this seems to be a targeted distinction in the wake of the success of Bishop Samuel Ajay Crowther, who built up the Niger Mission and was the first Black leader of the church in West Africa. But really, I'm looking at these treaties as forming the foundation of governance for the extractive economy that echoes in contemporary legislation. And here I'm showing you the treaty signatories, because I think it's really fascinating and important to see to use any opportunity to share these materials, where you can actually see ancestors and try to piece together the story over and above sometimes how it's summarized in our textbooks and other articles that we might read. So what I'm saying is that, as I've said, these laid the juridical foundation, but this was under the guise of protection, but really they were treaties of possession. I think there's a very fantastic book written by a Nigerian scholar, which I think some of you are familiar with, Shasore, called Possession, which talks about Lagos colony, and he's a legal historian, which is again an excellent book. I really am borrowing this analysis of possession of protection really being possession. But at the same time, I'm saying that they place a burden of protection on the actual original owners of the land, and were offering the sole privilege of trading with them, but trading under unequal terms, which remain today. So they promulgated, the colonial empire powers promulgated a discourse of protection and rights, which actually laid the foundation for what I've called this unequal compact of rights and responsibilities that communities continue to carry today. So this is another fascinating map created in 1888 by a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and it's a map of the Niger Delta. Mark the date, 1888. This is after the Berlin Conference. And what I want to show is, which you can probably, I can go back to the map, but this is a close-up of that left-hand side legend. And on that legend of the box, it lists all the surveys from which the map draws, which include those from the officers of the Royal Niger Company, the Liverpool African Society, which really indicates clearly the intertwined links between the scientific community and the institutions of empire and the colonial government. So they utilize their links, their investment, and knowledge of this region to develop the trade into palm oil. So this is the trade that took over after slavery. And on the back of the nominal abolition of slavery, and I'm calling it nominal abolition, as other scholars have done, because many of the parties which were engaged in the palm oil industry and developed it to be a massive global industry had previously been involved in, or their money had been tied up in the slavery trade. So much of the infrastructure and flows of palm oil relied on those which stemmed from slavery and really tied people into working in what can be termed slave-like conditions. So palm oil gave its name to the tertiary oil rivers before the discovery of petroleum. And the Liverpool African Society is a society that had links with the former slave trade under the Royal African Society. So this also highlighted this triangular interest, financial interest between London, Liverpool, Merseyside, and Scotland. So I'm giving you another example from the archives of the Mineral Ordinance, which was signed in 1914. And treaties and juridical authority were consolidated through these types of ordinances passed to cover the colony and of Lagos and Protectorate of Nigeria. So 1914, which is the date this ordinance was signed, is a significant date in world history, as we all know, because it was the start of World War I in Europe. But it was also at the beginning of that year, 1st of January, that the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates of Nigeria was signed into being by Lord Frederick Lugard. So really we see this Ordinance Act signed at the end of 1914, and it really brings into, if we take that same global outlook vision that empire operated under, but we use it also in terms of how we think about our scholarship, we can really keep drawing these transnational linkages from the colonial era to the present era that we're in now. So the colonial government had oversight across all operations regarding mineral oils, as noted in the interpretation section of the ordinance. It also gave draconian rights to the Governor General, which included those stipulated in points 3 to 6, which is called licenses and leases, and point number 4. And these gave the governor comprehensive rights and powers over all land above and below ground, in the pursuance of the extraction of mineral oils, and subsequent sections of the ordinance granted the Governor General the right to impose a range of sanctions on those who did not adhere with the regulations of the ordinance.
Sorry, Wendy, can you please just help summarize in the next 2 minutes, please? We're already almost out of time, please. Can you just use 2 minutes to summarize, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I won't go into that, but really, what I want to say is that there was a contradiction and tension between the coercive and imposed colonial juridical system, which as its counterpoint was the hope of independence, where really people looked at extractivism as the hope for development. And so I've taken this image, again, it's from 1959, and it's showing the headline of the Eastern Guardian, and sitting there is a young person, and I've counterposed it with a more recent image of devastation from oil pollution, environmental pollution in the Niger Delta. So what I want to round off with is where we are now in 2025 in the UK at the High Courts of Justice recently in March, after a very long battle, a case brought by the Bile and Ogali communities in the Niger Delta, in Ogoniland, is being heard in the High Court of Justice, and they're bringing the case against Shell because it has its headquarters both in the UK and in the Netherlands. And Shell has fought this very strongly because its case was that the case should be heard in Nigeria and not in Britain, that there's no jurisdiction in Britain, but at the same time, after a very prolonged, which I can't go in for the purposes of time, we had in spring this year, I was in the court to hear over 3 weeks, what they call preliminary arguments, where the legal teams on both sides have Nigerian senior advocates come and interpret Nigerian law in the context of British law. As you know, the two legal systems are bound together on some matters. And what has really been interesting to hear in the court, that even in the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021, this issue of collective punishment, which is really an issue that dates back to this colonial era treaties of protection, where communities or indigenous nation states were made to be responsible for any damage that might happen to the trader's property or equipment. So those kinds of protection are still there, even in the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021, whereby if a member of a community which has also at the same time suffered or want to bring a case against an oil company, but if a member of that community is found to have been involved in some sort of sabotaging of oil pipelines, etc., then the whole community will not benefit from the provisions that are in the current 2021 Act. So this is something that I feel is important for us to understand, that these battles need to be fought in a way that really gets to the roots of where the injustice lies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that presentation, and for also taking us to Niger Delta so we can understand some of the issues surrounding the oil considered extractivity from the colonial period up until 2025. Without taking much of our time, I would quickly like to run down to Kelechi Njoku Igwe, who will speak to us today about African resource governance and the challenges. Kelechi, please try much as possible to keep the presentation within 12 minutes. I wouldn't want to talk too short. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. Of course, I'll dive down to the presentation without taking our time now. The topic is African resource governance and the challenges. Well, initially, the topic I took them to the abstract in the harnessing the goals initiative of the African of this what we have to go with what the LSA has done. So very quickly, I'll go with my presentation and I have an introduction and overview of African resource governance, where I'll be giving the definition of the meaning of resource governance, which is equally in line and in same cut across with the previous presentations that we've had. Then we look at the question of the trajectory in African resource issues. Of course, natural resource cost paradigm, which is a big issue in Africa, and also to interrogate the current dilemma in African resource issues, and we also provide strategies on the African Union in navigating through the issues of African resource problem, then conclusion and recommendation, and also, of course, next one. So, by definition, I define resource governance as systems, institutions, and processes that determine how natural resources are managed and used. This importantly encompasses the rules, regulations, and practices that guide the allocation, extraction, and distribution of resources like mineral resources, water, forest, agriculture, land, and these issues. Then looking at the current complexities of the emerging international relations, we realize that wars in other parts of the world have direct implications to Africa. Of course, the current trending issues in the world, where we have conflicts in Middle East, conflicts in Europe, and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, equally have direct impacts in African affairs. Because, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war has directly caused what we have as food insecurity in the world, because a whole chunk of food distribution chain do come from this aspect of the world. If you look at the oil and energy production as well, the oil coming from the Middle East have been greatly hampered by the ending the Israel war with the Arab neighbors, and of course, Israel war in Gaza, Israel conflicts ongoing with Iran have direct implications to Africa. But now, how can the African continent on their own put some frameworks that can help manage curtail issues of resource exploitations that we've had in the past? And then equally, they feel established that from history, Africa have always been at the receiving end in terms of resource governance. Looking at from global history, right from the early age of overseas European expansion that led to several years of slave trade, equally down to colonialization, and of course we had the legitimate trade in those eras. And the peak of resource exploitation actually happened in history, majorly not just the slave trade era, but the Cold War era, where you have the major powers in the world, coming down full force in Africa, not just for regime change, but also for mineral resource exploitation. Now, Africa is, tilting towards going back to this bombing era, where we have the major powers coming down to the continent to, exploit, and we have this unfair and unequal mineral deals with superpowers. And also, let me bring this in context with the trend of what is happening in Congo. The war is, the war has actually gone down because of the US intervention with their mineral resource deal. Congo, the conflict between M23 and the Congolese government was actually resolved by the Trump administration intervention with their mineral deal with Congo. Now, the M23 conflicts with the Congolese government have been claimed that resource was at the central of this conflict. But then, why would a foreign power intervene using a resource deal to broker the peace for this conflict? That shows the lapses gap of the African continent to put up a sustainable framework that will help mitigate these issues. And these issues are going to this issue keep thinking if the African Union as a continental regional organization of the continent do not step up and provide the resource governance frameworks to mitigate these issues. So we'll see Congo definitely will ask presentation for receiving slide that probably buttress this point. Also, this might be okay, but then just to give an overview of the dilemma in Africa in terms of resource governance. 65% of all cultivated areas land for agriculture will determine the future of food security for the world population that will be 9.7 billion by 2050. Now, the future of energy transition for the world power lines by renewable energy will be dependent on Africa. The issue is that with the climate change debate that is going on. The world is seeking for an alternative to energy and also for major minerals. Now, Africa possesses a lot of these valuable minerals, but then the major powers be coming down on Africa. But how can Africa, come up with a resource framework, governance around governance that can help mitigate, the foreign interventions of this major power? And this is why this research is very important. Though it's an ongoing research, and everybody appreciates interventions on profiling strategies for the African Union in mitigating the excesses of foreign intervention in Africa against the African resource. So Africa has the largest deposit of free minerals for renewable energy and shakers for manufacturing solar panels, battery energy storage systems, electric vehicles, which will power twin economies of the world towards net zero emission, which is actually the goal of the United Nations through the COP21 down to COP. We are actually in the COP29 by next year, which we probably be looking at climate change issues. But then the bedrock of this whole issue, lies in African resources. So I try to give a geographical representation of African mineral resources to show the major critical minerals in Africa, where they are located. Of course, Congo dominates. You probably have in the center of Africa where you have the critical minerals like bitumen, cobalt, and many of them. The two map of Africa highlights these points. Also, okay, I think I'll display this. Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, so for African Union to come up with sustainable strategies to help African states mitigate issue of resource exploitation, and also learning from the era of the Cold War era where the superpowers pitted African countries against each other for mineral exploitation. With research and with historical knowledge, we realize that it will be best for Africa to come as a united force, have one policy on resource governance, which will help them mitigate this problem. So now the challenges challenges of African resource governance. First of all, we have resource costs. Second, we have the political influence, transparency and accountability, implementation gap. Resource cost is an issue because it has often been said that where you have abundant natural resources, then we have countries in that or the communities in that particular place fighting each other for the control of these resources. Distribution, allocation have been a problem. Then geopolitical influence refers to the foreign intervention of the superpowers and other major powers in the world coming down to Africa for exploitation. Then transparency and accountability, we are looking at issue of poor governance from African states because African states have failed to put up sustainable frameworks to mitigate the excesses of foreign interventions. That's why we have this problem. Everything boils down to poor governance within the continent. Then implementation gap. We realize that though sometimes African countries do have quality legal frameworks to mitigate the excesses of foreign intervention or exploitation of African resources, but then enforcement and implementation have always been a big issue. Looking at the jurisprudence case for Africans to actually come together, run together, to come up with a social framework have been, so lacking. So, and also going forward, next month, we try to look at African regional economic communities, referring to ECOWAS, SADC, and other regional communities, and also regional mechanisms that the AU can put up, harmonize, unified, synergize to, wage off foreign intervention for Africa's minerals. And the AU have done well by putting up so many frameworks, but these frameworks are not actually domesticated in AU member states. Of course, so many people have not heard of the agenda 23 of the African Union, which have a whole lot of goals for the continent to do better. And one of the goals for Agenda 23 is actually, resource governance frameworks to help mitigate the excesses of foreign intervention in Africa. resource. And the dilemma that we have, the French, the declining of the French hegemony in Africa because of the several years of exploitation from the colonial era, France having colonial pacts deals with their former colonial states. Now, these countries are fighting back, but then poverty must not be the comparative advantage of Africa. Nearly half of the global good and one-third of minerals are in Africa. With the vast mineral resources and human resources, Africa should not be where it is today. Nigeria and many African countries. Let's go to the current dilemma. Let me highlight just 2 minutes. Okay. Yeah, okay, there. So just fix your eyes on the screen. You see the dilemma we are having. Mali having a deal with Russia for gold refinery. We have the Niger Republic government sending the Chinese mining companies packing from their country. Next slide. We can see Mozambique, trying to control their coal industry. Next slide as well. And this is very important. The earlier case study that I mentioned, the US government intervening in the Congo M23 conflict with a resource mineral deal, which shouldn't be happening. Libya have been devastated by foreign powers, majorly because of resource and exploitation. So let's look just to highlight the strategies we have. Next slide. We propose strengthening governance framework, investing in green energy, engaging stakeholders, promoting transparency and accountability, and also addressing issues of climate change, which will lead to investment in green energy. So, in conclusion, I propose for, okay, let's go to recommendation. Let me just fix it from there.
Yeah.
So, just read recommendation.
Yeah.
No, the first slide. Okay,
The first slide.
yeah, of recommendation. Yeah, okay. So, okay, this study recommends that Africa should stop securing loans that are backed by natural resources. Natural resource loans are not transparent enough and they are very expensive. The African governments that do go into natural resource negotiation for loans with these foreign powers do not, see to the end of the loan agreements, and at the end it becomes a global and national problem for that particular country. Now, clearly, underinvestment, we are still currently underinvestment in African renewable energy industry, but this needs to be improved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rich, for that brilliant presentation and for helping us to follow up with what is already going on in Africa with regards to resource governance across different parts of the African continent. We are almost behind time, so I wouldn't want to give a lot of synopsis on that. I'll quickly go to Bernard Coffee and Queenette Omoyibo. If you're ready for us, we would like to listen to you now on the topic energy contrast development in West Africa, political economy analysis approach. Bernard, are you ready? Hello, Bernard, can you hear us? Bernard. Bernard, can you hear us? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay, please, please, you have the floor. Try as much as possible to stick to 12 minutes, please.
Okay, so let me quickly share my screen.
All right, please.
So we are still waiting on you to share your screen.
Bernard, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm trying to share my screen.
You just have to click on the share.
Click on the share icon.
Click on the share icon.
Okay.
Maybe if you are having some issues with your system, if you want us to proceed to the next speaker, I'll come back to you.
Okay, that'll be fine.
All right, Julie. Please, Honorable, if you are ready, please, can you proceed with your presentation?
Okay. Where I am is morning, 10:40 a.m. and I know it's evening, afternoon over there. Good afternoon, everyone. The introduction has been made. I'm having a little challenge of sharing my screen. That's why I have forwarded the presentation to the panel chair so that it will help me, so that I won't waste time struggling to do that. I will rectify the fault later. So my topic is originally the changing nature of British colonial industrial policy in the eastern region of Nigeria, 1939 to 1960. Now, it's a familiar terrain. Many studies have done on this area, argument upon argument on industry and what industry is all about. But we are going to have a little departure from what has been ongoing. Like Falala Dem, Njoko, A.A. Lawa have argued strongly that industrialization during colonial period, be it Eastern Nigeria or elsewhere, is industrialization of exploitation. Lawa even called it industrialization as a tokenism. Now, I am now going to argue that the industry never existed. What we actually had was raw material, processing plant, and at the tail end of colonialism, factories and manufacturing. The industry was never anywhere to be found in Eastern Nigeria. I wouldn't know about other places. But we are going to make the presentation and try to convince the audience why we say so and what actually is industry in the right sense of it. Now, throughout British colonialism of Nigeria, the industrial policy of the imperialists changed according to their need at the time. For instance, between 1900 to 1938, there was a period of exploitation, exploration, and evacuation of raw materials to metropolitan London. But by the period of 1935 to 45 was a time of intense effort by the British colonial government to support the war effort and expedite the evacuation of raw material from the eastern region of Nigeria, which they were in dire need of. The era of 1945 to 1960 was marked by the British colonial government as a recovery effort from the war on the one hand and plan to exit Nigeria finally at the end of colonialism. Now, the study aimed to examine the evolving nature of British industrial policies in the eastern region of Nigeria during the period of investigation. The research adopted qualitative approach and corroborated with archival material and secondary sources. We argue that the level of change in the British government policy in the eastern region of Nigeria was obvious as the imperialist government in London was responding to its current need at any point in time. The study concludes that if industry is defined as a conception of ideas to solve production problem, one would argue that industry never existed in eastern region of Nigeria during the period of study. Now, we don't have more. We'll quickly go to the concept of colonialism and industrialization so that we will begin to have an idea of why I took the position and what the paper is all about. We are familiar with colonialism as a relationship between the indigenous majority and minority of foreign invaders for exploitation of their resources by the latter. Now, Rodney also pointed that the one point or one agenda colonialism has was the purpose to repatriate the profit made from colonized people to the so-called mother country. Now, the Marxist view of colonialism also tried to bring in a position that colonialism is a form of capitalism that enforces exploitation and social inequality So they said that working with the global capitalist system, colonialism is closely related to uneven development or unequal development. And it is from this point of view, we saw that colonialism is also actually related to imperialism. And in our position here, we agree with Robert Young, who argued that imperialism is the concept, while colonialism is the practice. So for the purpose of this paper, when we talk about types of colonialism, I won't waste my time going into details. We chose about 4 of them. There might be others: settlers colonialism, exploitations colonialism, surrogate colonialism, and internal colonialism. Why we choose these 4? They are so common. And the interesting part is that, of course, we know that Nigeria suffered what we call exploitation colonialism during colonial period. Not only Nigeria, British and French colonies in West Africa. Then after independence, why I brought the internal colonialism, after independence, or currently, Nigeria is suffering what we refer as internal colonialism. So it has not actually left us, but the pattern has actually changed. Now, when we talk about industry, which is the bane of the argument of this paper, that I said we are going to have a little departure from what argument had been made about industry. We agreed with what Falola them said, what A.A. Lawal them said, what Onwoka them said in economic history of what actually transpired and the kind of industry established. They called it industrialization as exploitation, industrialization as tokenism for the benefit of the West and all that. But let us just look at simple what industry actually means. We said is the conception of ideas to solve production problem. The key to industrialization is the ability to transform knowledge or ideas into reality. We argue that technological transfer is not industrialization, regardless of how sophisticated the technology appears. Instead, where technology is patented, the secret knowledge of the idea behind the technology invention is held. Now, industrialization, we know or will agree that is a process of transforming an economy from one that is primarily agrarian and labor intensive to one dominated by a mechanized manufacturing economy. It involves the development of machines for factories, urbanization, growth, and all the rest. To be industrialized, we say the idea must spring from the soil. It must be homegrown, which in turn produces high-tech manufacturing. This means that manufacturing is a byproduct of industrialization. It implies that factories or manufacturing are at the tail end of industrialization. It was on this basis we take a position to argue that the Eastern Nigeria colonial period did not witness any form of industrialization in its traditional sense, not even manufacturing, which is a byproduct of industrialization. What was littered all over the region during the period of interrogation was processing plants that fed the manufacturing outlets in Europe. And what actually came up like manufacturing at the end of the day was from 1957, and what gave precedent to that was 1954 legislative election that gave indigenous majority the more majority seat in the assembly. It was at this time the indigenous legislators began to reshape the policies to at least have what is called manufacturing. And towards the end of my paper, we are going to see if there is time how this idea brought about cement factory, not cement industry, because the idea wasn't here. One thing about that cement factory, the machines, the plant, the process, the diagram, everything was designed in Europe and transferred or implemented in Nigeria, in Nkalago, for example. The same thing with brewery. Brewery was in Lagos as far back as 1947, but it didn't come to Eastern region until 1957. In fact, production in Aba actually started in 1959. You also give credit to the Eastern Region Assembly that had majority of indigenes in 1954. Now, for us not to waste much time, I will just pinpoint one or two things, like give examples like coal mining, for example. Coal mining was in 1909, and this led to the construction of railway and establishment of Port Harcourt in 1912. They will tell you, yes, they developed Port Harcourt, they did this, they did that, but what was the reason behind Port Harcourt City? The reason was simple: to evacuate coal from Enugu. There is no other reason. They didn't do it for the indigenous to have a comfort urban area of any other, it's just evacuation port. Every other benefit was secondary. Now, unfortunately, the Nigerian coal product doesn't have a higher quality as a result of a high carbon content. So they didn't take much serious about it until it was not until 1950 that led to the establishment of Nigerian Coal Corporation in the same year. Before then, it was a Nigerian railway that was managing it. And of course, they had some output. The people they were servicing Electrical Corporation of Nigeria, and they were also supplying coal in other British West African colonies and the Marine Department. Now, we have about 3 major coal mining sites in Enugu, Asaden, Bireti, Eva Valley, and Hayes. The output differ 12,000 tons, 750, 225. And by 1957, coal production in Nigeria had increased from 582,000 tons to its highest peak of 925,000 tons in 1958. Now, the limestone that led to the establishment of Nkalago Cement Factory, which we also erroneously refer as industry, was actually discovered in 1941. We saw a memo written then by the Chief Director of Public Works to the official letter to the divisional engineer, telling them about the importance of limestone discovery in large quantity at Nkalago near Enugu. That was in 1951. By 1950, local cement factory manufacturing was considered after light deposit was suitable for quality production at Nkalago and Ogu division. They had only one thing to import, gypsum, which was only raw material needed to import in making cement then. So the 2 major materials were gypsum and limestone. By 1954, negotiation has been concluded by the British colonial government by bringing in United Kingdom firms, 2 of them, cement manufacturing firm and a consulting engineer to establish cement factory at Nkalago. Now, it was the idea and the preparation was done in 1954, even though the discovery of limestone was in 1941, but cement factory didn't commence operation until December 1957, which we refer as the twilight of colonial period in Nigeria. Now, for oil and mill industry.
Sorry, you have less than 2 minutes to round up.
Okay, that's too, okay. Yes, I will sum up. We draw conclusion by saying that we acknowledge that there were outlet processing plants and all that in Nigeria or Eastern region during colonial period. But we said, if not of 1954 Constitution, that was what provided enabling grants for overwhelming majorities, indigenous majority in Nigeria Legislative and Executive Council, that gave rise to what we refer as indigenous idea of promoting factory other than processing plants. Now, when you look at our discussion summary chart, I try to put it this way: from ascending order, you see industrialization at the peak of the ideas that gave birth to manufacturing and factory as its byproduct. Then you see processing plant, that is material fine-tuning. Then you see raw material, which is industrial sustenance. Colonial period actually ran these 2. Raw material, then during World War II, they started campaigning for processing plants in eastern Nigeria as a result of recovery from war effort. It was not until the end of colonialism from 1957, both the cement factory and the brewery in Aba came up in 1950. In fact, brewery in Aba didn't start operation until 1959. So you cannot give credit to the colonial period that it was the colonial authority that championed that. It was the Legislative Constitution of 1954 that gave rise to indigenous majority. So thank you all.
Please, one of the reasons why we try as much as possible to ask panelists to keep to the time is to enable us have enough time to interact with the audience, to provide suggestions, insight. But we'll take so much time to make presentations. It means we will have little of the time to have that sort of interaction. Please, Bernard, if you're ready, please, you have the floor. Please, can you try as much as possible to keep to 10 minutes with your presentation? Bernard, okay, please, try as much as possible to keep it to 10 minutes, please.
Very well. I'm doing that.
Okay, thank you, please. The time starts now.
Okay.
This year.
There's not you. Yeah.
Bernard.
Sorry, if you can't share, maybe you should continue while you try to.
Hello, Bernard. Bernard, can you hear
Yes,
us?
I'm sure that the document can be supported. So if you can pick the next speaker, or you can start.
The last speaker. Maybe you want to just present that slide. We'll also get your points. Yeah. Already your 41
Okay.
to your presentation time, please.
Okay, so just give me a second. Let me try again.
Or you share it with the panel, the chair.
Okay. Just a second.
But you can start your presentation while
You want to start the presentation, but we run out of time already.
Very well. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernard Kofi, and I am presenting on analyzing the context for energy governance and development in West Africa from the perspective of political economy analysis. And I would like to acknowledge Associate Professor Konet Omoyibo, who is on the line, and then also a co-presenter, co-author of the paper, and Prof. Nachuku, who is not online though, but also a co-author of the paper, and as well as my supervisors as well. So basically, we are looking at energy governance in West Africa, and as we may all be aware, energy is an essential commodity in West Africa and the world all over. And governance issues has been a key part of it, which has resulted in what we call resource case. And so in places like Ghana, where I come from, you can realize that one key challenge of energy sector is indebtedness. And so there's huge indebtedness. There's a point that they needed to introduce the energy sector levy, which we all have to bear and then pay as well. And also some of the African countries, and including Nigeria, where I've stayed a bit, also has issues with energy governance, and then indebtedness is also part of it. And recently they had to introduce the fuel subsidy, which also affected the economy. So basically energy is key, and then the issues surrounding it is very important. But most often we have always tackled the solutions from the technical perspective without necessarily looking at the political economy aspect of it, which also factors into it, because it's featured basically in politics and also elections, and even has the capacity to determine the outcome of politics. So it's important that energy is looked from the political economy perspective as well. So basically, my paper was looking at that context, and then I was sampling about 5-6 West African countries, including Ghana and Nigeria, to determine, to be able to serve as the case or the basis for which to make the argument for the paper. So when you go to when you talk about political economy analysis, it's a tool that is used to assess the political economy context of energy and then governance as well. And it has been used basically in the practical sense, especially by institutions like the World Bank, to assess the viability of projects. And so it has become important that as we are looking at how we can govern the energy well, we are able to utilize that also in the academic field. So basically, going forward, I define some key concepts in terms of what it means when you talk about energy governance. I have forwarded the slides to you if you can just quickly share with us. So talking about energy governance. So, and then when you take a country like Nigeria, for example, I've mentioned about challenges in terms of that. When it comes to Nigeria, there are those issues of clientelism, whereby political figures and sometimes uses their influence and to be able to award contracts. It's the same thing in Ghana, and which also resulted in the crisis because himself also decided the political next president that was supposed to succeed in 2016-2017, and which led into the incoming government led by Akufo-Addo. So energy is highly political, but often it is being patronized. And so you see that the result that we expect to come out of the governance issue does not really reflect what is on the ground. And so looking at the issue of Benin, for example, Benin is a smaller country, and although it's hosting the West African Power Pool, it also has slight challenges in terms of energy, but that is being well managed. And then they are now also trying to focus on renewable energy. And then a country like the Gambia, also it's a small country, but they're also focusing on renewable energy. So looking at these countries that I used to sample for the paper, you can see that there are dynamics, and also Nigeria is a powerhouse and there is a larger economy. So sometimes this decision making in terms of West Africa in the area of energy governance, they are often dominating in that perspective. So what I did in terms of methodology for this paper was to speak to experts in the field. I had the opportunity to work a little bit at the West African Power Pool, so I got some experts there that I spoke to, and also got experts in the other countries that I also sampled to take their perspective on the governance challenges and opportunities in the energy sector. Because basically, when you are applying the political economy analysis, there are several factors that you can consider, or several methods that can be done, whether you want to use the actor objective principle. So what I did was to use a method called the ECPM, that is the European Commission for Political Management System. They have a methodology that they use to analyze the political economy of the country. So I used their method, and that method involved combining, doing a literature review to understand the context and background for it, and then also speaking to experts as well. You can also decide to do the primary data collection, going on the ground to collect data. But I restricted myself to the expert for this paper, and then also did some literature review to lend credence to it. So basically, so the understanding from the expert is that in a place like Nigeria, I've already mentioned about colonialism as well, how it has confronted the issues of energy governance. So it's emerged that when it comes to governance, previously the colonial leaders developed the economy and then provided energy infrastructure on the basis of urban-rural central. That is, they concentrated more on the urban areas at the expense of the rural communities. And so the infrastructures are there, and that is what is being relied upon. And so there hasn't been much improvement or much progress that is being made in terms of the infrastructure that we need to rely on. Also, I've talked about clientelism and then patronism. So basically, it's about father figure. And if you are going to get a contract, so if you have father figures in politics or the government of the day, and you are likely to get the contract that you need. So colonial legacies were still reflecting in our governance challenges. And the same thing is in Ghana. That is how the British developed the economy and also provided infrastructure for development. And so those legacies are still reflecting in the system. And then, yeah, so basically I had 5 factors that are reflected. So I talk about the foundational factors, which are is on the screen right now. So you can see I've mentioned about colonial legacy, post-independence.
Sorry,
policies,
you're having less than 2 minutes to round up.
Okay, very well. So, and the key issues are nuclear energy, as which I have done, and then geographical constraints. Can you please move ahead? Yes. And then, so this literature, and then the rules of the game. So, it talks about the formal regulations or institutions and the informal institution. And you realize that the informal institutions dominate more in governance than the formal institution, although there are formal rules and regulations that should be applied. Can you move ahead? And then, so I've mentioned about the formal and informal rules already. So weak enforcement of formal rules is affecting governance systems. Can you please move ahead? Please go on. So this is also about the sector characteristics, the political characteristics of the sector. We talk about fossil fuel dominance. Now we are moving towards renewable energy, but you see that in the place of Nigeria, Ghana, for example, the concentration is about fossil fuel. So we are doing more drilling in Ghana. We are doing more drilling, which is also affecting the transition towards the energy sector. So, and then we also talk about donor influence in the system. So please go ahead. We talk about donor influence in the system. That's the external factors. So we talk about donor influences in the system. Ghana, Nigeria, when I went to WAP, I realized that most of their projects are supported by European Union and the World Bank. So their decision basically dominates the pace of development in terms of energy in West Africa. Please go ahead. So basically, the recommendations are this, that we need to be able to understand that we are moving towards energy transition. So the investment that we are making in terms of the fossil fuel, we need to reduce this and channel some into renewable energy development. Although West Africa, through their energy master plan, is implementing some renewable energy project across West Africa, but governments, national government need to invest more to be able to transition and also increase the energy in these countries as well. And I also talk about donor influence. We need to be able to properly finance our energy sector development, to be able to reduce the dependency on external factors, and also be able to mobilize local capital to be able to fund our energy infrastructure. And we also need to, for example, on the field of renewable energy, we need to be able to build the capital and then technical skills, be able to produce most of the materials in this country. So then I have some references, which is at the end of it. So thank you so much. And sorry for the challenges earlier.
Well, thank you. It's been a very, very impactful panel, a lot of insights, conversation. Unfortunately, we took so much time with the presentation that we have just 8 minutes left for Q&A. I know the audience has a lot of questions, and also as the chairman of the panel, I also have questions, but I think I'll have to keep my questions. I'll follow up with the panelists with email. Please, if you have questions to ask any of the panelists, please take questions very quickly. Okay, we have one hand here. We would like to have one question, one with the panelists. If you don't bombard any particular panelist with so many questions. Do we have any questions online? Okay, we can quickly start, please.
Okay, mine is going to be more of an intervention, and the first goes to the first presenter and the marble industry. Say that one, we need to justify the selection of that that timeline, 9 to 1986. Why? Sorry, to the marble person, or not the person online. You know, and you already told us how it started, because the struggle was 1999 or 10, right? 1986, which perhaps would be because of the structural adjustment program and all, but you need to bring that out to make us see. Now, the issue is I'm a political scientist, but it was one of those things that drew my attention to this panel, political economy. You understand? And I was out to see those key indicators of political economy analysis, which I didn't really see. Some of it were mentioned in the course of the discussion, but it would be good if you can bring these issues out better in a thematic format. And one of such is to say that when you look at the politics and economics of the marble industry, the discovery of oil was a major issue that affected, the development or even the abandonment of the marble industry. There was a total shift by government and institution to the oil industry, and that itself affected, the development of the marble industry. Another is the patronage and the rent seeking. You mentioned it, the UPN, MPN, Ashamu, Bola in the Senator family, and geopolitics, but it's loving good. If you come up with it, in a more thematic manner. And again, the under industrialization of the economy at that time, which made the country to be more consumption oriented. And that in itself, at the point of exploring maps, the final products were still important. So these are some of the issues, the politics, the policy indicators, the economic indicators. We need to bring it out so we now look how it's intertwined to affect the map industry. And to the second, the African resource. Very simple. I just personally feel that the research still seems bogus, looks big. African resource, no timeline, no resource focus. All of the resources we have in Africa across all the African countries. It looks so massive. So you might want to consider either streamlining it to a particular timeline or a particular resource across the African region. But taking all of that all at once might be too bogus for you. And then same thing to the extraction. Yes, you've shown the extraction, but what about the product dependence of most of these products? The raw materials are here, but what about the governance that might have influenced the production dependence that we have in the case? So in all, my point for you is just that curiosity is not sufficient for research. Clarity matters. So you might just want to reshape things and have a very clear focus.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Do we have any questions on my please?
No, we don't have to.
Okay, if there are no questions, I think we still have some time. I would just like to ask Honorable, please, can you just provide some clarity with regards to the Enugu coal mine? I know you said something about the coal mine and the reason why Port Harcourt, for instance, was so as a point of extraction. I was wondering, given the level of investment that was made in the Enugu coal mine between 1915 up until 1940s, when offering coal technical services was, consulted to expand the coal industry. I was trying to probably get you to talk a little about where you really situate the Enugu coal mine. Is it like it is not really sort of industry? Is it like just only sort of an extraction point? What is the idea? What is your idea about the Enugu coal mine with regards to your argument in terms of no industrialization in the southeast? And you can respond very quickly. We have another question, we can also throw that out.
Yeah. Okay.
The basis of the argument is simple. We are saying that even if you use $50 billion to put into a manufacturing outlet or an extractive outlet, it doesn't in any way transform it to industry. Now, what we are actually saying, what is industry? The coal mining was set up. Colonial government put in funds. How was extraction done? The machines, the mechanism, the idea, the design. Where was it carried out? None was carried out in eastern region of Nigeria, and it was not in any way indigenous. Eastern region people or indigenous people were the miners, and the miners were like the tail end of whatever the byproduct is all about. It's as good as arguing what is going on in South Africa now, the mining industry in South Africa. Yes, political apartheid has ended there, but economic apartheid has not ended because the economy is absolutely in the hands of the Dutch till this very morning. So the fact that indigenous were to not make it indigenous, the design, the machine, the everything, the idea was colonial, not minding the amount of money they put in. It doesn't translate it to an industry. That is the point I'm trying to make. The industry, yeah.
That answers my question. I'll just quickly go to Nalowende. Can you hear me? I have something I'd like you to probably expatiate on. I was wondering if you could help us understand how do we account for the role of the people of the Niger Delta region when we talk in terms of exploitation. I know, of course, during colonialism, the colonial government exploited, most of the foreign industries also exploited. But of course, as someone who spent a lot of time also in Nigeria, I've seen situations whereby some sort of local chiefs, some sort of individuals who are highly placed, they've also become a sort of exploiter of the people, and they collaborate with most of these foreign companies to create injury, to cause harm, to cause environmental havoc. And at the end of the day, they get some sort of monetary, reward while neglecting or putting their people at harm's way. So I wanted to talk to us about that situation and what's currently going on with Nigeria Delta.
Maybe that will happen.
Please, maybe just 2 minutes, please. Very quickly.
Yeah,
Very quickly, please, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think my answer is slightly linked to the intervention before mine, which is really just inviting a tiny percentage, 0.00% of the population to join the governing colonial elites who were the outgoing empirical power. Does not necessarily mean it changes the dynamics, So I think one of the things it's also I think what I wanted to show with that last slide was also as also one of the other presenters has indicated. So from when you had these indigenized parliamentary representation, there was a hope that we can make the system work. So there are always good-hearted people, even in the midst of corruption. There are also people who believed in the education project, who felt that these are pathways. And I really enjoyed the paper very provocative about the paper that you've given us, Opara, saying that this is not industrialization. I really enjoyed your paper because I think that these are the things we need to really delve more into, change our current way of thinking. It's not about pointing fingers. I think we're all embroiled in this, and we all need to look at the fundamentals.
Thank you very much for that response. Please, I want to appreciate all the panelists and also the audience for engaging with us on this particular panel. It has been a very, very interesting and insightful conversation in the last 1 hour, 30 minutes. I really appreciate every one of you for making it possible today. Thank you very much. And I will follow up on some of the conversation through emails. Thank you very much.
Thank you.